Hi, everyone. This is a video on some of the background to the Odyssey. The first thing we'll cover is the Trojan War and the Iliad. Um, the Iliad is the predecessor to the Odyssey. It's the first major epic poem attributed to Homer. Um, and you'll notice that the Odyssey is about the return of Odysseus from the Trojan War. And that brings up the question, well, what was the Trojan War? What was going on there? Um, the Trojan War may or may not have really happened, but if it did happen, it probably happened sometime around the 1200s BC. And the basic cause of the war was that a Trojan prince named Paris had gone and stolen Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world, from her husband, King Menelaus of Sparta. And this was an awful violation of hospitality. He'd been a guest in Menelaus's house, but according to the legend, he had used the power that he had gotten from the goddess of love, Aphrodite, to steal away Helen. Okay, and the reason that leads to a war is that many of the different Greeks from their different cities, there's no one Greece. There's instead a lot of different cities ruled by different chieftains or kings. And what happens here is that Menelaus' brother Agamemnon, who seems to be the most powerful man in Greece, he's the king of Mycenae. He then gathers together a coalition of Greek rulers and their armies to go and fight at Troy and besiege Troy. And this war also draws in Odysseus. He is crafty, he's wily, he's a great strategist. He has different nicknames like that in the Iliad and the Odyssey. And Odysseus actually didn't want to go. He pretended to be out of his mind and was plowing in a very strange way with two different animals. And well, what happened was that the recruiter said, okay, you don't want to go. We'll put your baby son, Telemachus, in the path of the plowing. And when Odysseus veers off to miss Telemachus, well, then they know he's in his right mind. So he goes, and he has to leave his new son Telemachus and his wife Penelope and his whole household behind. Well, the Trojan War takes 10 years until the Troy finally falls. The most famous character on the Greek side is named Achilles. And in a lot of ways, you can say that the Iliad, the first of these epics, is the main character, and his wrath, his rage, is the main kind of force or the main theme, because he is so angry at Agamemnon, okay, for taking away one of the slave girls that Achilles had plundered from another city that was allied with Troy. So that's part of the background there from the Iliad. Now, the Iliad is interesting because it only takes place in the 10th year of the war. It doesn't have Achilles' heel. It doesn't have the Trojan horse in it. It starts with the feud between Achilles and Agamemnon, and it ends with the death of Hector and his funeral. Hector is the great hero of the Trojans. And so it just takes place over about 50 days or so, it's said, in the 10th year of the war. So kind of what happens with the Iliad and the Odyssey is that the audiences of these poems probably knew the larger story and legend of the Trojan War. In fact, there were something like 12 poems that were in this cycle of epics, it's called, about the Trojan War. So the Iliad and the Odyssey are just part of the larger Trojan War universe, to use the term that's associated with comic books today, the Marvel universe, the DC universe. This is the Trojan War universe. The Iliad and the Odyssey are entries in that. Okay, and they both have very specific focuses. Iliad on the Achilles and Hector rivalry and the Odyssey on the return of Odysseus to his homeland. Okay, so that's something of our background. Now, why is it called the Iliad? Because the other name for Troy is Ilion, Ilion, and so the Iliad is a poem having to do with Ilium or Ilion. Okay. Now, you'll notice that these are very warrior focused. They are very not only warrior focused, but elite warrior focused poems. And there's a lot of common soldiers and common men that serve these warriors, but there's a real focus on the kings and the chieftains and the great men of these cities. And so that tells us a little bit about the culture too, and that these are the heroes. Okay. Now the Trojan War ends after 10 years, famously because of the Trojan horse. This is crafted by or come up with by Odysseus himself, the wily one, and that is that. Well, if we can't besiege Troy and take it over in the normal way, then we will make a horse. We'll hide our best men in it, and we will leave it outside the walls. The Trojans will think it's something that will help them with Poseidon, the sea god, and they'll bring it in, and then we'll all jump out. And indeed, that's exactly what happens. And so Troy is taken by a trick, not by just kind of brute force. And it is Odysseus, the crafty one, who comes up with the strategy. Well, then the Greeks have to come home with all their plunder. And the story was that most of the Greeks had a very hard time coming home. And some of them didn't make it, or were, in the case of Agamemnon, killed as soon as he got home, as we'll find out. So that's kind of a background to the Iliad and where it starts. And next, I'll talk a little bit about the context in which this was written down and how we get the poem.